Cry It Out Loud, a podcast by Chasing the Rainbows with your host, Bernice Quisenberry.
Welcome back to Cry It Out Loud, the podcast where we turn pain into power one story at a time. I'm Bernice, and today we have someone truly special with us. Her voice that's moved thousands, a songwriter whose lyrics feel like they were written just for us, especially in our darkest moments. Shelly Johnson is a celebrated singer whose music doesn't just entertain, it heals. But behind the spotlight is a story of deep loss and transformation. Today, Shelly will be sharing all about her personal experience through grief, how it shaped her music, and the songs that became lifelines for her and for so many of us. So grab your tissues, take a deep breath, and join us for this powerful conversation. So, hi, Shelly. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it means so much to have, your powerful voice and be able to share, all about your lost journey with our listeners for them to, hear who you are.
Yeah, it's an honor. God doesn't waste anything, and he uses everything we go through. And I've found that he especially uses the really hard things we go through in the biggest ways. So it's an honor to get to share. Anytime I get to share some of my journey, it's always an honor to see God use that to bring just a small amount of healing to people's hearts and their own journeys.
Oh, thanks, Shelly. Well, and I was introduced to you, through one of our survivor volunteers and through, your music speaking and resonating to, baby loss survivors around talking about these, this type of traumatic grief and all of that. So I would love for you to share, about yourself and your story with our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I grew up, I feel like something that I am really thankful for that I've realized as an adult that I think I probably took for granted as a child was just the family life that I got to grow up with. Just had two parents who really loved the Lord and loved each other and loved us. I have two older sisters, so I grew up in a family of three girls. And we just had a really, every family, every extended family has their family dramas and their challenges. And we definitely had those, but our core family unit, just of the five of us, was just really loving and really caring. And I always knew that my parents loved me and loved each other and loved the Lord. And so I think that was just such a foundation for my life, and didn't realize until well into adulthood just how much of a foundation that was going to be. So for me, childhood, I have a lot of happy memories from my childhood. But when I was 13, my daddy was diagnosed with cancer, just totally out of the blue. It really blindsided our family. He seemed to be a picture of health. He was in really good shape. He was fit. He was 45 years old. He was young. He was, he just seemed like he was doing good. And then all of a sudden, he wasn't. And they found tumors everywhere in his entire torso. It was just really, really bizarre. And we went through all the treatments and all the things, but nothing really helped or made a difference. And so I watched him battle cancer for 9 months as a 13-year-old girl. And for me, it was just really formative because, he was my hero. He was the strong one in our family. He was just always the one who could fix anything, tackle anything, conquer anything. And so I remember the first time I ever saw him cry was during that season when he told us that he had cancer, and just watching him be broken and watching him literally just not just be broken emotionally, but to be broken physically. He was, he exercised a lot. He was really fit and in shape, and just watching him go through chemotherapy and cancer treatments and just what that does to the human body. And he went from being this really vibrant, healthy 45-year-old man to just literally being skin and bones, and just watching your hero of your dad just wither away right before your eyes is there's really not words to describe, the toll that takes on a 13-year-old girl's heart and mind and life. And so during that season that he was battling cancer, music had always been my life, just my whole childhood, just playing piano and singing. But when my dad was battling cancer, I just really poured myself into my time with Jesus at the piano. And I just felt like I met Jesus behind my piano, and I started playing and praying and writing songs, and I would just go sit at my piano, and it just became my sanctuary with the Lord, where I would just pour my heart out and cry and just try to process all the emotions that I was dealing with. And I remember the night that he passed away, I was so devastated because I really believed that God was going to heal him. And I really was praying for God to answer that prayer of healing. And obviously he answered it eternally, but he didn't answer it the way that we hoped in healing him, healing his earthly body so that we could enjoy more time with him on earth. And I remember the night that he passed away, I was just so shocked and so devastated because I just really believed God was going to answer my prayer, and I couldn't believe that he didn't answer my prayer. And I just felt so devastated and disappointed and hurt. And I remember walking down to the piano where I had spent so many months just pouring my heart out to the Lord. And I just remember I slammed the lid shut over the piano keys, and I just sat there in silence, just looking out the window, because I didn't know what to say to the Lord. I just had no words. And I just remember feeling his presence in that moment for the first time in my life. I had never experienced the presence of God until that moment. And it was this tangible, it was like he was sitting on the piano bench right next to me with his arm around me. And it was just this tangible presence of, I knew the Lord was with me, and I knew that he had me. And that was a pivotal moment for me of commitment. I just felt him say to me, I know you don't understand this right now, but if you keep trusting me, I promise I'll use this for your good and for my glory. And so for me, that was a commitment that night in 1999 when my dad passed away. And I just was like, okay, Lord, like I'm going to trust you. I'm going to follow you. And so I had a very clear calling on my life to write songs and lead worship and do music as a ministry. And there was just no doubt in my mind that that's what I was supposed to do. And so that's the journey that I've been on ever since. And I led worship all through high school. And then I moved to Nashville, Tennessee to go to college and studied music there and had a great experience there, and was involved in a wonderful church home there where God just really nurtured my heart. And I got to serve under some wonderful shepherds and pastors who really cared for me and just poured into me and mentored me. And so really, I mean, it's just been, I'm 39 now, and just, have been journeying with the Lord for these last 26 years. When my dad passed away when I was 13. So it's been 26 years of just watching God turn, beauty, or turn ashes into beauty. And I've been through a lot of seasons, different kinds of loss. The loss of my dad was the biggest one, the first one. And then, we've walked through different seasons of job loss and just wandering seasons. And we've gone through a lot of church hurt seasons as well. But another major loss that we walked through was when we lost our second baby to miscarriage. After my daughter was born, we lost our second baby. And there was a song that was born through that process called Heaven Someday. And even just how God has taken that song and used it just in ways I could never imagine has just truly blown me away. It was the one song that I probably thought I would never record or release because it just felt so deeply personal to me. And it just felt like a grief healing song for me personally. And it was so raw and so tender for me at the time that I wrote it. I couldn't imagine recording it, much less putting it out there for the world to hear. But God just made it so clear that he wanted me to do that. And I've just been completely blown away by just the message. I mean, I literally get messages every other day on YouTube from people all over the world who are going through the same thing. And God is using that song to bring comfort. And it blows me away just how the Lord works. And, I think I've learned, I still have a lot that I have left to learn, but I feel like I'm just starting to learn just the value that grief and that loss really has in our lives. We don't want to go through these things. We hate it, and we want to avoid it at all costs. Right. But there is a cost to knowing God on a deeper level and knowing the depths of his presence and his goodness. And the cost is that you go through great pain in order to know that. And it is a treasure when you get to experience the depths of God at that level. It is a priceless treasure, but it doesn't come without great cost and great pain. And, something that God has really reminded me of recently I think a lot of times when we go through, and I hope this can encourage your listeners, because I'm sure they've felt this before. A lot of times when we go through these painful seasons and it just feels so unfair and it just feels so unjust, and we just battle with God and we're so angry because we just think, how can you allow this to happen to me? Or how can you just stand by and just let this happen? And we just start to ask all the why questions. And it's so hard to understand. And it's so hard to relate to God in those moments, because you question his love for you. You question his presence with you. You just question his goodness, all these things. And it's funny, the things that God will use to just jolt my heart into truth. Because a couple weeks ago, we've been walking through kind of a recent thing. And a couple weeks ago, my son's pre-K teacher, she sends out like this text every week to all the parents of what they learned that week in preschool. And this was just a routine, just weekly group text to all the parents. And in her text, it said, this week, our Bible story was on the story of Daniel. And she said, Daniel's faithfulness and obedience to the Lord landed him in a lion's den. And just something as simple as that, it just hit me so hard. Sometimes we think if we follow God, if we do the right things, if we trust him, like everything will just work out so great. And some, things do ultimately, eventually, eternally work out. But when you really study scripture and you start to see all these people who walked with Jesus, like most of the time, it's the ones who trusted him and were faithful and obedient, they actually found themselves in the lion's den, or betrayed, or crucified, or imprisoned, or persecuted. And so we're actually in really good company when we are suffering and when we go through suffering, because we're literally in the company of Jesus and all these heroes of the faith that trusted him, but yet found themselves walking through really hard seasons. And so just remembering that it's a marathon, and, heaven is our ultimate reward and our ultimate home, and the ultimate moment that we get to finally rest and finally exhale and know that Christ will make all things new. But until then, we really are on a journey of, there's going to be hard things, and it's really just about trusting him. And how much do we really trust him? And it's really easy to say that we trust him, but when it really comes down to it is when your heart is completely shattered, completely broken, you have no answers, you have no explanation. And yet, even in the midst of that, you just say, Lord, I trust you. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In joy and in sorrow, I'm going to trust you. And so I think that's probably the biggest lesson that I've learned in my adult journey, is just what it really means to trust Jesus and how much it really does cost.
Thank you so much for sharing, your story and your journey, and, you turning and finding, your God and everything, Shelly. This is so powerful. And, I think in those moments, you're right. Like, we question so many things, and it's hard not to, right? When you are faced with that adversity, especially, lost parents and, losing our babies and not getting a lot of answers and things like that. And it's true. It's hard not to question faith, when, but it's really in those hardest moments when we need to turn, to what we believe in and, hold on to, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely, Shelly.
Yes.
And what's interesting is, so you're saying that, and this is how we got connected was through, someone reaching out to you and all of those things, because of how powerful your words are. Like, what does that mean to you when you get, other lost parents reaching out and saying to you, thank you, like, thank you for your music, thank you for your words, because it really does open it up to, ways that I can't sometimes communicate words, but from a beautiful songwriter and, those kind of things you do. And it's, yeah,
it's really, for me, it's a couple things. It's really just the evidence of God's redemptive work. Anytime I get a message or anything from somebody about how a song has just ministered to them in their darkest moment, it's just another example of God being faithful to that promise he made me the night my daddy died, of, like, when he said, if you'll keep doing what you're doing, I promise I'll use all of this for your good and for my glory. And, God is so faithful to his word and to his promise. And So for me, it's a proof of his faithfulness, but it's also it's really beautiful to see just how God can use one person's journey and one person's pain to then breathe life into someone else's pain. And only God can do that. I mean, because in the world that we live in, the world of darkness, like pain just breeds more pain. Like that's so upside down for pain to bring healing. But only in God's kingdom does he do the upside down. He literally takes something that's really painful for one person, then he's able to transform it and then use it as something healing in someone else's life. And it's just this beautiful, holy thing that only he can do. And it just really is an honor to even be used in that way, that he can orchestrate something that is just so healing and so just has so much sacred holiness to it in someone's life.
Absolutely. And I mean, finding, people who understand and survivors who understand what you're going through is so important in those moments, or like someone that, like is in the trenches with you and things like that too. And finding someone who understands, the feelings that you're having, those emotions. And like you're saying, God has used you as a vessel, your beautiful voice, your music, to really touch people and to put that, almost like we always say, purpose behind our pain, because, we can never take, of course, healing and working through things. But really, though, we're always going to be missing a piece of us and, having different things to turn to and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, something else that I think I've learned a lot about just the process of grief and is that it's not an event that happens to you, that you go through something and then you move on. Because I think a lot of times, especially after my dad passed away when I was a teenager, a lot of people would say like, oh, well, time will heal and you'll move on. And, I think that, people mean well. People always have good intentions when they say those things, but it's not really, I've found that it's just not really true. I think grief is a relationship you enter into, and it's a lifelong relationship you enter into, because it doesn't go away. And it's almost like you don't want it to go away, because in some ways that's a way of honoring the memory of the person that you lost or the child that you lost. It's like at some point your grief and your memories is really all you have to really hold on to. And so, I think it's just important to remember that it's not just this event that happens that you live through it and then you move on to the next thing. It's something you have to learn to just live with and embrace. And it's actually a very healing process to live into the grief. I used to think that, it's like you had to move on from something and let yourself heal and just let time do its thing. But I figured out with my dad's journey, it actually became more painful. Like as I got older, when I got married, when I had my daughter, when like all these milestones in life, when he wasn't there, it actually was, the pain just sort of kept compounding on itself, because you feel the void more and more and more instead of less and less and less. And so I just had to learn, this is a part of my life. This is a part of my story. And instead of trying to just move past it, I'm just going to embrace it and let it be what it is and let it just have its place in my life. And it was actually through that process that I really started to experience healing. And I was able to truly heal from the experience and not feel like my soul was just bleeding all the time, but I was able to have the wounds and the scars, but learn how to live with the wounds. And it's through that brokenness that I think God shines through those wounds. And I think that's where we really start to see the beauty and the healing take place. And, just not allowing ourselves to avoid grief, not allowing ourselves to run from it or to stifle it, but to truly like lean in and just go all the way there. Because it's usually at rock bottom. Because once you hit rock bottom, the only place to go is up. And so if you try to avoid hitting rock bottom, you kind of run the risk of, you're just going to kind of always be falling. But if you just allow yourself to just fall into the arms of Jesus, like he will be there at rock bottom and he will begin to heal your heart. And that's where you really see his presence and feel his presence. I also heard something recently that I really loved the way it was stated. It talked about not minimizing our
Yes.
grief.
Yes.
Because I know I ran into this, and I hope some of your listeners can identify with this. Um, even with something like miscarriage, everyone, there's all different stages and levels and types, and like just the way that people go through it. It's like, some people you could argue like, well, that was so much more traumatic than that, and you go through different things, and it just is
Why are
like,
we comparing?
that is so not helpful, like we don't need to compare, like there's no purpose in that whatsoever. And I've run into that a lot as I've talked with women, and they're like, well, it's nothing compared to what, so I'm like, no. Like your
Yes.
story is your story, and what you go through, like you carry it, and we all carry it. And so it doesn't matter any of the specifics. It's like the heartbreak is the heartbreak, and
Yes.
period. And so I think that's been a big thing too, is just truly learning how to look into your own story and see, the things that have happened to you, and really allow yourself to name them for what they are and give them the weight that they carry, and not just try to minimize it or treat it like it doesn't matter, because it does matter. And the things that happen to us, if we don't know how to process them and grieve them and carry them well, then they will just eat away at us from the inside and just wreak so much havoc in our heart over the long haul. And so it does matter. Our stories do matter, and they matter to the Lord.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Shelly. And what's interesting is after going through such, a significant, grief with losing a child, right, at any stage or age. And like we're all walking the same staircase, just different color steps, right? But the thing is, like, we learn how to intentionally live, and we learn about how precious life is. And it is living with both, because like you said, like we're moving forward, we're not moving on, but we're learning how to put one step in front of the other again, because now we're a different changed person, because we just lost someone so significant to us. And so how do we do that, right? And each time, like, I know I need different coping skills, or I need different things that work for me, and to really sit and process with, to be able to get through, like, to work to a place that, okay, like I can talk about it, or I can, getting to, not be down in the doom and gloom, like you're saying, like where we just keep falling, instead of just allowing ourselves to fully process it, be with our feelings, sit with it, and really learn to, how to pick one ourselves up. And I think it's, having a community of people, having those that understand, and really, outside of, your faith and things like that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the other thing is, we're made in the image of God. And when you look at the image of God, like he's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, like he's not alone. Like he enjoys community, and so he created us to enjoy community and to enjoy having people with us. We're not meant to just do life alone and suffer alone and cry alone and do this alone. And so there's so much value in carrying our each other's burdens and walking through stuff with people. And that's, I think, one of the most beautiful fruits that we see from going through grief, is that we gain an empathy and an understanding for other people that you can only gain when you go through it yourself. And so when you go through something, you now have an empathy and an understanding for other people who are going through stuff. And then that now creates this beautiful community and this beautiful two-way interaction where you get to encourage someone else. You get to be there for someone else. You get to be a listening ear for someone else who's gone through it. And that is an intangible value of just brings so much comfort and so much healing when you don't have to walk through it alone. And that there's other people who don't just hear and understand what you're saying, but have actually lived it and carried the same weight of pain that you have carried.
Yes.
The heaviness of it. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I feel like too, when you get with, in a room with someone and you all of a sudden have that instant connection to one another, it almost cuts your pain down a little bit too, when you're like in those moments, because that human nature of wanting that connection. Yes.
There's something about knowing you're not alone that relieves the burden just a little bit, makes it easier to bear. Yeah. Absolutely.
Goodness. Well, what is on the horizon for you with your music? What have you been working on, or anything you want to share with us? We
Yeah. Yeah.
love what you're doing.
Yeah, so I actually have a new song that I just finished writing that it's called Better Story. And it's kind of so last couple years my husband walked through a pretty intense job wilderness. He was laid off from the company where he worked for 22 years. They were laying off like tens of thousands of people. It was like this mass company thing. And so it wasn't personal, but it felt very personal because, he poured his heart and soul into this place for 22 years. And then they were just like, no, thanks, see ya. So that was pretty devastating. And I walked through that with him. And there was a point in that journey where, after about a year and still no job, still no answer to prayer, still just silence from the Lord, he really started to get discouraged. And he told me one day, he said, I feel like Joseph in the book of Genesis. He said, I feel like Joseph sitting in prison, waiting for the cupbearer to remember my name. And that just was such a profound picture in my mind when he said that, of just how that must have felt for Joseph, when he was going through life and successful and everything. He's running Potiphar's house and he's doing what he's supposed to do and he's being obedient, he's being faithful, he's doing the right thing. And then out of nowhere, he's falsely accused by Potiphar's wife and he's thrown in a dungeon and he's just almost like forgotten about. And just all this time goes by and he's sitting down there in prison just with all this gifting and all this leadership ability. And he's just sitting there just feeling totally forgotten. And that's how my husband felt, just felt like he had been kind of cast out for not doing anything wrong. And then now here he is just waiting. And it's interesting because we were reading in Genesis, the story of Joseph, and it says, after 2 full years passed, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. And then after that happened, Joseph was restored to, his position and all of that. But it was interesting. It said after 2 full years passed. And for my husband, like literally from the day he got laid off until the day he got his job offer, it was exactly 2 years to the day.
Oh my goodness.
And it just was such a picture of like, that was his Joseph season. And it was just so crazy the way the Lord was so faithful. So I wrote a song about it called Joseph Song. And it's just it's a heavy song, but it's just, you're sitting in that moment of like, you're asking God, like, do you see me? Do you remember me? Have you forgotten me? Do you know that I'm still here? Kind of thing. And so this next song I've been working on is really just a deeply personal song for me that I feel like is kind of the sequel of that song. It just talks about the better story that God is always writing, that he's always writing a better story than what we can see at the moment. And we just have to trust him to hold the pen and to hold the pages and to write the story the way that he wants to write it. And so I'm excited. I haven't totally finished it yet, but that's probably going to be my next release on the horizon. So be on the lookout for a song called Better Story, hopefully in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shelly.
Yeah, of course.
I can't thank you enough for coming on here, for sharing, about your music and, how much music means to you, because obviously it's been a very intricate part of your life's journey and through so much heartache and, pain and things like that. So, what do you want to leave our listeners with in general about loss, music, or anything?
Yeah, no, I would just say, keep trusting in the Lord. Just keep running to him, no matter if you don't have words or not, no matter how deep the pain, just keep running to him, whatever that looks like for you, however you can keep reaching out to the Lord, keep drawing near to him, and just trust that he will be near and he will draw near to you. It's a promise. And I've seen him be true to that in my own lifetime after time after time. So I just want to encourage all of you to keep trusting in him, no matter how dark the night may be.
Well, thank you, Shelly. And thank you so much for being here, for being, raw and real with us, and your courage to share your story, your pain, and your healing journey through music. It's just such a gift and one that just keeps on giving. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, for our listeners out there, if you're walking, through your own grief right now, and I hope today's episode reminds you that you're not alone. As Shelly's music shows us, there is beauty in brokenness, and sometimes the most powerful healing comes from simply letting yourself feel it all. You can find Shelly's latest album. We'll make sure to put your music below in the bio so people can find you, Shelly. And trust me, it's, worth listening to and checking out. And until next time, be kind to your heart. Let it cry out loud when it needs to. And remember, healing isn't linear, but it is possible. And I'm Bernice, your host of Cried Out Loud. Take care.